Hi everyone, welcome to this video on lesson 15 of the Earth and Climate Scheme of Work. This one is called Switching to Renewables, and really it's an opportunity to build on all of the ideas that we've been talking about already in this sequence of lessons, and get students to practice thinking in a really kind of disciplinary, by which I mean logical, ordered sense. And using lots and lots of the kind of terminology we've been introducing so far. And it's also a really important lesson in that it starts to introduce some of the ideas that come up in the GCSE, which are around, I guess, the overall idea is that science tells us lots of amazing things about the world, but actually in the kind of real world, let's say, we don't just make decisions, especially kind of political decisions. We don't just make decisions based on science. There's always lots and lots of different things to talk about. And there's a bit of a preamble here. It's actually looking a bit outdated now. I planned this lesson a few years ago, and now Angela Merkel is no longer Chancellor of Germany, and some of it is kind of old news. So if you wish, you could come up with a more recent context, a more relevant context, let's say. But in terms of the concepts that we want to get across here, it's really just building on what we did in the last lesson, and getting students thinking in terms of these energy resources. It really in terms of three main categories. One, is it reliable? Two, is it renewable? Three, does it release CO2? They're the main three, and there's a couple of others, as we'll see. Visual pollution is one here that I've got in the first example. But really, it's about getting students to kind of read language in the question and infer that it's talking about one of those three things. So let's have a look and see what that means. By the way, before I start, one thing that should be said before I start modelling here, just in terms of where this sits in the curriculum, there's a pretty decent argument, to be honest, to say maybe this should come after climate change and after we've done the greenhouse effect in loads and loads of detail. That said, students should already be familiar from primary school and from the lessons that they've done so far that there's this link between carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and greenhouse effect and climate change. So actually, in my experience, most of them are pretty comfortable with this, even if they've not got an in-depth understanding of the greenhouse effect yet. If you wanted to move these lessons around, I think that there's a decent rationale for doing that. But anyway, yeah, I'm just gonna I've got it so far in lesson 15, and that's how I'll carry on. So the way this lesson's structured is really just I do, we do, you do. There's only 4 examples at the moment. You could easily add more. And what I wanted to do here is just give some case studies where students have to really identify what's going on. So the first case study was Angela Merkel in Germany, as I said before. And what I do when I model this, I mean, actually, ideally, you'd have this printed and you'd kind of underline it with the students. So underline the text and show what you can infer from that. So I'm just summarizing it here because I don't have the text here. I don't have a printer at home. But even more effective is to actually underline it or highlight it there and then. But the first thing that we can pick out from that text is that Merkel didn't want to invest in resources that contributed to climate change. So I've just summarized that as no climate change. What we want to say to students is when you read that, in terms of our 3 categories, what are we thinking? Well, we're thinking no CO2. So no CO2 released into the atmosphere. And what that means is nothing that involves burning. So I'm going to put no burning. Therefore, in terms of those 5 options, I've given some multiple choice options just to make these questions a bit easier. But in terms of the 5 options, that means no oil, no biofuels. So that's just the kind of modelling we can do. And again, you either explain that through your own exposition and kind of narrating that thought process yourself. You might want to ask students some questions and say, show many thumbs. If she doesn't want to contribute to climate change, do you think we could use oil? Yes or no? Why not? And tease out this idea. So that's really up to you. But again, the main thing is that they can, students, by the end of this lesson, they can infer from phrases like that if we don't want to do that, then we can't be using oil or biofuels. Now, visual pollution, that's something that's not come up yet. So in this I do example, it's there so that you can introduce this idea. And that's this idea that there are things that spoil the landscape. And that, I say that in inverted commas because obviously it's a contentious issue, and you know, different people have different views about landscapes and so on. But what you can say here is a lot of people are not happy with, in particular, wind turbines and solar panels, because there's this feeling that they detract from nature. And if you really wanted, if students have learned about romantic poetry, you could relate it to kind of Wordsworth and Coleridge and their views about nature and so on. But to make it easier, you can just say, look, visual pollution tends to be associated with those two, wind and solar. And the phrasing in the question here was a little bit difficult, so really draw students' attention. There's kind of a double negative. Really go through and highlight that what that means is basically Merkel didn't care too much about this problem of visual pollution. So visual pollution, not an issue. We can put here wind plus solar, okay. And here I'm just making notes that are going to help me write in a minute. So that's worth emphasizing as well. The last thing to say is this is in Germany, so that rules out one of them straight away, because as we said in the previous lesson, geothermal can only be found in volcanic regions. So the fact that it's Germany means geothermal is not available, so we can write no geothermal. And it's worth taking your time going through that, whether you write it like I've done here or whether you model it by annotating a printed copy, that's absolutely fine. What we then need to do is turn this into sentences. And because this is an explain question, what we want to do is show students the kind of language that we use to link together ideas when we are explaining things. And this is in really simple terms. We're going to build it up in a later lesson in this scheme of work, to really start using cause and effect sentences and identifying overall cause, overall effect, really writing these kind of fluid ones. In this lesson, we're just introducing it in very, very simple terms, just using those causal connectives, things like because, therefore, this means that, and so on. So what I might say here, how might I turn this into a full sentence? I might say, Merkel does not want to contribute to climate change and what I really want to draw students' attention to is if I'm explaining, I need to link that causally, so I'm going to use a word like therefore. Therefore, she could not choose a resource that involved burning. And again, you might even say something about CO2 as well. The point that you want to make to students is the more of these scientific ideas you give, the more sophisticated your explanation. So you may add something about CO2 as well. I'm just going to finish off by saying, consequently, she should not have chosen oil or biofuels. And that word consequently is another really good causal linking word that shows that this idea links causally to this idea, links causally to this idea. Okay, so that's a really, really a nice one that you can use as well. What I might do, because I'm going to be emphasizing this in later ones, I might emphasize this one, so emphasize these two. Next thing, I might put, I might actually go to this one next. So I might say she could not choose geothermal. So I'm thinking here of another causal linking word, and there's a, you know, you may have been to CPD on because, but, so, but now we're kind of giving the explanation first and then relating it to the information that we were given originally. So instead of doing a therefore or a consequently, we're doing a because. She could not choose geothermal because, and it's worth you can emphasize that to students, the order in which you put their ideas in terms of cause and effect, affects whether you're going to use because or therefore, or an equivalent word to either. So she could not choose geothermal because Germany, I might put Germany does not have geothermal, or Germany does not have, even better, volcanoes. So geothermal isn't really available there. I'll put finally, and in fact you could add finally as a word, although that's maybe more for a description where you're linking ideas together sequentially. So let's put let's do the next one. Visual pollution. Visual pollution was not an issue. Or Merkel, comma, which meant that she could choose solar or wind. Stop. So we've given an explanation of why she couldn't choose oil or biofuels, why she couldn't choose geothermal, which leads us to say, well, actually solar or wind was going to be her best bet. So that's one example that we could do. What we're going to do next is look at the second example. I would go to the slides now and have a look. This is the example to do with the factory owner in the UK. And just have a think, how would you do this sort of planning? You might want to sketch some notes here. How would you do this planning before you model that to students? So I'll just ask you to pause the video now, have a read through that second example and think about how you would plan that. Okay, thank you for pausing. So I'll just go through this quickly. I have written an answer to this one already, so I won't go through the whole thing. But the things that I would be focusing on here when you're doing this with students, let me just move that down a bit more. So if it's factory in the UK, well, it's in the UK. It's not in Iceland, Japan, America, anywhere with volcanoes or kind of geysers and stuff like that. So I'm going to put no geothermal. Small scale, we'll come back to that. The fact that it's both biofuel generator and oil generator. What you couldn't have is like a huge coal power station or a nuclear power station, but that's not as important here. I might just draw students' attention to the fact that we've got generators rather than huge power stations. Renewable, well, that instantly rules out oil, because oil is not a renewable resource. And again, you've got the multiple choice options there, so you could say, she wants something renewable. Which one does that rule out? And they should say, I think it's option 4. Let me check. Yeah, it's option 4. They'd say, right, option 4, that's non-renewable, so that's ruled out straight away. And then this is the most interesting one, I think. If she needs a constant supply of energy, students may not spot that what that means is she needs something that's reliable. And if she wants something that's reliable, well, she probably doesn't want solar or wind, because it's not always sunny, especially not at the moment. It seems to have been raining for days here, although the sun has finally come out now. And it's not always windy, so wind turbines don't always turn. So once you have gone through that with students, then you can model some really clear writing to them. So if we do the first one here, so she cannot choose geothermal. And again, I'm going to emphasize here my causal linking words. So we've got because the factory is in the UK. She would like a renewable resource, therefore, again, causal linking word, she should not choose an oil generator. She needs a constant supply of energy, which means that, so that's a really nice causal phrase. It was actually in the previous one, and I forgot to highlight it, but which means that, or this means that, is really good as well. She should not choose an unreliable resource like wind or solar. Consequently, it's another great causal linking word that you can model to students. What we do when we're explaining. She should choose the biofuel generator. Got another one here as well, look, because this is small scale, renewable and reliable. I just realised that's hidden by a picture of me. but that is the kind of sentence, or sorry, that's the kind of paragraph that we would like students to write. So that's quite a long video, but I hope that's really clear how you would model that to students. And again, this lesson takes a kind of I do, we do, you do format. So if you go through one really slowly, narrating your thought process, then you can co-construct this second one with students and get them to maybe construct 1 or 2 sentences independently. And then you can give them some further examples and really get them to practice identifying which category is relevant in each question by themselves. In the next lesson, I think we start looking at the Earth's atmosphere, and then finally we will get on to the greenhouse effect and climate change after that.